Hello, so there are many types of modulations. Depending upon the modulation techniques used, they are classified as shown in the following figure. The types of modulations are broadly classified into continuous wave modulation and pulse modulation. In the continuous wave modulation, a high frequency sine wave is used as a carrier wave. This is further divided into amplitude and angle modulation. If the amplitude of the high frequency carrier wave is varied in accordance with the instantaneous amplitude of the modulating signal, then such a technique is called as amplitude modulation. If the angle of the carrier wave is varied in accordance with the instantaneous value of the modulating signal, then such a technique is called as angle modulation. As you can see, the angle modulation is further divided into frequency and phase modulation. If the frequency of the carrier wave is varied in accordance with the instantaneous value of the modulating signal, then such a technique is called as frequency modulation. If the phase of the high frequency carrier wave is varied in accordance with the instantaneous value of the modulating signal, then such a technique is called as phase modulation. As I mentioned before, the types of modulations are broadly classified into continuous wave modulation and pulse modulation. But what is the major difference between these two? Well, in pulse modulation, a periodic sequence of rectangular pulses is used as a carrier wave. So the main difference between the two is that in continuous wave modulation, the carrier wave is a high frequency sine wave, while pulse modulation uses rectangular pulses as the carrier wave. As you can see, pulse modulation is further divided into analog and digital modulation. In analog modulation technique, if the amplitude, duration, or position of the pulse is varied in accordance with the instantaneous value of the baseband modulating signal, then such a technique is called as pulse amplitude modulation or pulse duration width modulation, or we can even hear the term pulse position modulation. In digital modulation, the modulation technique used is pulse code modulation, where the analog signal is converted into digital form of ones and zeros. As the resultant is a coded pulse train, this is called as PCM.